Hi! I cannot believe it is already Monday. What is happening? Oh my goodness. I don't know how you're all feeling today, but I am feeling a little bit tired. But shout out to the flatmate for making me a lovely coffee and a homemade peanut butter biscuit, and he's really good at making these as well. So I'm really grateful for my for my housemate at the moment. Yeah, so I hope you are all doing really well and you had a good week last week, and I am back this week with another story. Yeah, and I actually thought last week, I think it's about time we had a story that involved fairies, because I know that some people wanted some stories that involved fairies, but Anansi was winning over all the votes. But this time we didn't have anyone vote, so I thought, let's make it a fairy story. So I am going to tell you the story of the oak tree fairy, and it comes from a place called Hungary. It's a Hungarian story, but it's a little bit adapted. Yeah, so if you do know the story and you're like, wait a minute, it's because I have adapted it just a tiny bit. Yes, but nothing too major, just there. Yeah. So I am going to have one sip of my coffee and then I'm going to dive right into the story. Ready? Oh, much better. Okay, so this is the story of the oak tree fairy. Now, actually, I think I will have you join in. I think I will have you join in this week, because I didn't get your messages last week. I couldn't see them. So could you type the word, happy for me, just down in the section, and see just how long the latency is, and then hopefully I'll be able to see them, and then I can do something with it. So yeah, if you type the word happy, and I'll put some music on whilst you do that. Excellent. Can I see anyone's words? That's the question. I don't think I can. Very strange. I don't know what's happened. I'm gonna try and write one as well. Can you see this? Okay. Hey, okay, I can see happy. Amazing. I can see fairies. Okay, excellent. I fixed it. I don't know what I did, but it worked. Yeah. Okay, so you can join in this time. Oh, I'm so happy, because that was really annoying me. Excellent. Alright, you can stop typing happy. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I figured that out, because I felt really bad last week when I signed off, and suddenly I saw all of your comments and thought, oh no, they were actually talking to me. Okay, so this is the story of the oak tree fairy. And it starts with a prince. And this prince, he loved to go hunting. I'm not really a fan of hunting, but he was a big fan of hunting. So, this prince, he went into the nearby forest near his castle, and he had his hunting gun, and he was ready to hunt some wild animals. And he walked through the forest. It was a very big forest. What kind of things do you see in a big forest, I wonder? Maybe you can type below. What kind of things do you see in a big forest? I know for a fact that you see big trees with long branches, and they all seem to touch each other at the top, so that it becomes quite dark and the light just shines through just little gaps, so you get little shards of light coming down through the forest. What else do you see in that big forest? Type your answers below, and I'm going to have a think as well. So I said big trees with dapples of light coming through the branches. And they're quite old, aren't they, those trees as well, to be that big. Maybe you see some young trees as well that are growing just underneath, like they're just starting their life. Oh, Immy said a river, a big, lovely, like, river that runs through the forest, and it's all sparkly blue water, and maybe there are some stepping stones for the prince to jump across the river and keep his feet nice and dry. And Morgan says trees as well. Yeah, the nice big trees standing there, nice and tall, with big thick trunks. They're really old, and yeah, they've probably seen a lot of history, maybe. Oh, maybe they know a lot of secrets. Yeah. Oh, spiders and trees and some mud and some holes. Oh my goodness. Well, I hope that the prince doesn't fall down any holes. Oh my goodness, maybe he has to like jump over them, like a really big jump. Perhaps you can practice the big jumping. And hopefully, oh, he doesn't get stuck in the mud. Could you imagine with your feet getting stuck in that mud where it's all wet and maybe a little bit mushy? And spiders, ooh, I hope they're friendly spiders. Maybe they'll help you on your way. Maybe one of them knows a Nancy. Who knows? Yeah, spiders. And ants as well. Lots of tiny ants. Oh my goodness, carrying things to their queen. I actually have a story about when I was in a forest. This is a true story. I was in a forest and there were loads of tiny ants. And I saw like a few of them. And then all of a sudden it looked like the ground was moving because there was that many ants. Ooh, made me a little bit cringed. Ooh. Yes, so that was the forest. And the prince, he went over that river on the stepping stones, and he jumped over holes, and he squelched through mud, and he brushed spiders away in hopes that they wouldn't nip him. And of course, he used those big trees to his advantage. He hid behind them, and he listened, and he was quiet. And all of a sudden, he heard an animal. He heard an animal. Now, what animal could it be, I wonder? What animal did he see in the forest? One that he might want to hunt. Type your answers below. What animal did he see? What animals do we see? Well, we've already said spiders. What other animal? We said ants. Those are animals. And what other animals? Ooh, maybe squirrels? I saw a squirrel recently in my garden. I took a picture of it. It was trying to get the nuts out of the bird feeder. A very cheeky squirrel. Yeah, maybe they see squirrels or... Oh my goodness, a bear! Oh, wow. Do you know the sign for bear is like bear? Like, yeah, because they're big bear. So maybe a big bear, like a big brown grizzly bear, and sometimes they itch their backs against those big thick trees. Or wolves, of course, wolves, and you might hear them making their little noises in the distance. Oh, and Morgan says a fox. Ooh, foxes with their big bushy orange tails, and they're very quick. Badgers, of course, badgers, black and white, and they snuffle through the ground, and they go under the ground. Maybe you find, maybe those holes that you said earlier. Oh yeah, maybe they were badger holes, because that's where they live, aren't they? Underneath the ground, and they dig little holes, like little holes to live in. Well, lots and lots of animals, and he saw one of these animals, and it was a fox. He saw the fox, and he aimed his gun, and he was ready to shoot, when all of a sudden the fox put up its two front paws and said, "No, wait! Spare my life. Spare my life, and I will give you something that will give you good fortune." Ooh. So, he followed the fox and spared its life. And he followed that fox, and it showed him that beautiful river. And at the very end of that beautiful river was a spring waterfall. And he said, "Fill your flask up with this water, and it will bring you good fortune." So the prince, he put his flask under that water and filled it up and took that with him on his way. Then he carried on his journey, and he heard another animal, and this time it was a badger. And he aimed his gun, but the badger went, "Spare my life, and I will show you something that will give you good fortune." Well, the prince decided to take this badger up on his offer. Maybe this was a sign, and he followed the badger off, and he went through to the very middle of the forest. And this badger pointed at a huge oak tree with big long branches. And the badger said, "This will take some time, but cut one of the branches off of this tree." All right, well, the prince decided he'd listen to the badger. He'd see where this was going. And he got out his knife and he started to cut at the tree. Now this takes a very long time and his arms get very tired, but finally, snap, the tree branch falls. And as it falls, a beautiful, tall fairy comes out of the branch. "Oh no," she says, "water, I need water." And the prince remembered that the fox had told him to fill up his flask at the spring, and he gave the fairy this water. She drank it up, and she started to glow with life, and she was very grateful to the prince. "Thank you so much," she said to the prince. And they decided to be friends, and he decided to take her back to the palace so that she could live there, because she didn't have a home. She was trapped in an oak tree. So they started on their journey back to the prince's palace. Now, they travelled a little bit further on, and they saw a well, and they decided to have a rest. And when the fairy sat down, she realised, oh dear, she couldn't wear her fairy clothes in front of the public. If anybody saw that she was... If anyone saw she was a fairy, she might get captured again and put into another tree or something. So she said to the prince, "I will wait here. Can you go home and get me some clothes?" The prince agreed, because this sounded sensible. She was right. She couldn't wear fairy clothes in the village because people might try and capture her and steal her for her magic. And so he went off back to the palace to find some regular person clothes to wear. Whilst the fairy was waiting, she decided to rest up on top of the branch of a tree. So she climbed up the tree, stretched her arms, and went to sleep. Now, whilst the fairy was sleeping and the prince was back at the palace trying to find some clothes, a witch appeared at the well. She went to the well to fill her bucket with water, and when she looked into the well, she could see a fairy. She could see a fairy in the well. She took a stone and dropped it in the well. Bloop! But the fairy's face rippled, which meant that she wasn't in the well. She looked around and she looked to her left and her right, and then she looked up and she saw the fairy sleeping in the tree. What do you think this witch did? Was she a nice witch or was she a mean witch? Well, unfortunately, she was a mean witch. And what she did was she cut the branch. And so the fairy fell down into the well. And when she hit the water, splash, she changed into another animal. She changed into an animal that would live in water. What animal did she change into? What animal lives in water, I wonder? Maybe you can type it below and let me know what animal lives in water. My favourite animal that lives in water is a jellyfish. My favourite animal in general is a jellyfish, but that's more of an ocean animal. That's an animal that lives in a sea. I think it's got to be an animal that lives in a river or a well. Immy, I think you might be right. Immy said a fishy. She changed into a fish. That's right, yeah, Estelle said it as well. She turned into a fish. A beautiful goldfish. Quite a big one as well. Oh, it could be a shark as well. The sharks, they might live in the water as well. Yeah, they might live there. Or a swan, says Morgan. Ooh. Wow, she turned into a fish this time, but maybe we'll have to remember some of those animals for next time, because I think there are some really good ones, a shark or a fish or a swan. Ooh. Well, she turned into a beautiful golden fish. Now the witch, she rushed home and she got her daughter. And she brought her daughter to the well and said, I am going to make you look like a fairy. I'm going to make you look like a fairy. And you're going to sit in that tree and wait until a prince comes and gets you. So she waved her wand, poof, and the daughter turned into what looked like a fairy, but she didn't quite look the same as the fairy that the prince had found in the tree. So she sat up in the tree and waited. When the prince came back with the clothes, he looked around and he couldn't see his fairy until he heard yoo-hoo, and he looked up, and in the tree there was... Is that the fairy? And she jumped down and he looked at her. Your face looks different, fairy, said the prince. He was a little bit suspicious, but he really, really liked the fairy, so he didn't want to insult her. Oh, prince, said the fairy, I have sat here so long that I have blisters on my face from the sun. That's why I look different. All right then, said the prince, and he gave the daughter some new clothes. She wore the clothes and went with the prince to live in the palace. Now, the witch, she would often sneak into the palace and talk to her daughter, because she knew that the prince was very rich and she could make lots of money, and she would have a little bit of control over the prince's kingdom, especially if the daughter married the prince. Oh dear, this witch, she's very cheeky, isn't she? She is very naughty. So the first thing she said was, daughter, you need to tell the prince that you are very ill, and then you need to tell him that the only thing that will cure you is a goldfish that is fished from the bottom of a well. The daughter agreed, and she made herself look very poorly. How could she make herself look poorly, I wonder? Perhaps you could type below. How could she make herself look poorly? I know that when I wanted to sound like I was poorly or look like I was poorly, I would often pull like a sad face, like I was really poorly and I just needed somebody to look after me, so I pull like a really sad face. What do you think she did? How did she make herself look like she wasn't feeling very well? I wonder. Perhaps you could type below. What's another thing that you could do? How else could you look poorly? Perhaps you need to look like you're very hot, like you're very warm, like you've got fever. So perhaps you would use some steam to make yourself look like you're very hot and sweaty. That might make you look like you're a little bit poorly. How else could you make yourself look like you're a little bit poorly? Paint yourself green! That's a really good idea, Ruby! So paint yourself green. She dipped her paintbrush in and she painted herself green. And Dahlia says sneeze and cough. So she started going, achoo! Oh no, I'm very poorly and I'm green as well and I'm coughing and I'm sneezing everywhere. And then Morgan said she painted lipstick spots on her green skin so that she looked like she had spots. Oh, and perhaps, yeah, you're right, she could use that magic wand from the witch to make herself look really sick. Maybe she made herself look really sick and snotty or something. Oh, her magic wand, yuck. And so when the prince came and knocked on the door of her bedroom to see how she was doing that day, she came out and her face was bright green and she'd used the magic wand to make her nose all snotty and she had bright red spots all over her green skin and she kept sneezing and coughing. Oh, Prince, she said, I'm very sick. I need your help. Go to the well. And she told the prince to go to the well, and the only thing that would cure her was a goldfish, fished from the well. Ooh, dearie me. Now we know that the fairy turned into a goldfish in the nearby well. Oh dear. Well, the prince, he liked the fairy so much that he agreed, and he went to the well and he got his fishing rod, bloop, and he caught the goldfish. And he had the chef cook the goldfish for the daughter to eat. Oh dear. Now, don't worry though, because I don't think this is quite the end for our fairy. You see, as the daughter was eating the fish, some scales, gold and glittery scales from the fairy, dropped down onto the dish. And the dish was scraped out by the chef into the garden outside. And from those golden scales, a big tree started to grow. And it grew very, very quickly. And the branches stretched out. And from those branches grew big golden fruit. Ooh, I wonder what fruit grew on those trees. Maybe you can type below what fruit you think grew from those trees. My favourite fruit is apples. So maybe it was an apple tree? I don't know. What fruit do you think it was? Perhaps you could type below. Believe it or not, there's a cherry tree growing over the garden that I'm in the house I'm staying in at the moment, and it's got loads of cherries on it at the moment. I think I'm gonna pick them and make a cherry pie. What fruit do you think grew from that big tree? Type your answers below. Immy said an apple tree too, and you said a golden pineapple tree. Ooh, that would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? A golden pineapple tree. Oh, and Dahlia says oranges and pineapples. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful tree to have all of those fruits on it. Well, perhaps it had all three of those fruits, a big tree, and on there glittered golden apples and golden pineapples and golden oranges. Oh, those delicious fruits. And they grew really, really quickly. Oh, and golden bananas. Let's not forget those golden bananas, Morgan. Golden bananas as well. And on those trees, it would grow really, really quickly. In fact, in the day it would grow, and by night the fruit was glittering and shining in the darkness, and lots of different fairies from all over would visit the tree, and they would pick the fruit and they would fly away. And then the next day the fruits would start to grow again. Now the witch saw this tree and she was suspicious. She was very suspicious. She said to her daughter, "Daughter, you need to tell the prince that you do not like that tree and it needs cutting down." "Okay," said the daughter. And so the next day, when the prince knocked on the door to see how she was doing, the daughter said, "Oh, Prince, do you know, I've overslept. I'm so tired." And she made herself look really tired. How could you make yourself look really tired? Type it below, nice and quick. How could you make yourself look really tired? I wonder. When I'm really tired, I always look really grumpy. Like, I'm very grumpy when I'm tired. I tend to be a bit like this. Very grumpy. But how would you make yourself look like you're tired, I wonder? Maybe type your answers below and let me know. How tired does she look? You see, she had a bit of a plan to get that prince to cut down the tree. How can we make ourselves look really tired? I think the latency's gone a little bit on this. Dun, dun, dun. Imi said, rub her eyes. Of course, yeah, rubbing your eyes. Oh, like that. That makes her look really tired. And Adalia says brown eyes. Oh, made up maybe like dark circles, brown eyes all the way around. Oh, and she looks really tired and she's rubbing her brown eyes. Oh, And she said to the prince, "Oh, Prince, oh, I'm so sorry. I overslept. Oh, Morgan says messing up your hair as well. Yeah, looking like she just got out of bed, bedroom hair. Oh, and yeah, so brown eyes, rubbing those brown eyes with messed up hair." And she said, "Prince, I have overslept. And the reason I've overslept is because..." Oh, that's right, yawning Dahlia as well. Oh. "I didn't see the sunrise in the morning. I didn't see the sunrise in the morning because there is a great big tree and it's covering all of the light from my window. I thought it was still nighttime. See, that's why I'm still lying in bed." Well, the prince looked at her and she was still lying in bed and rubbing her eyes, and she had messy hair and she was slumping around, and he thought, okay, I guess I will get rid of the tree. So the prince, well, he was too busy to cut down the tree himself, so he ordered someone else to cut it for him. He ordered a woodsman to chop the tree down, and that's exactly what he did. He chopped down that tree and it fell with a thud. And when it fell, a bit of a branch fell from the tree. And for some reason, I don't know why, but the woodsman quite liked the look of this branch. He thought it looked quite pretty. And so he took that branch with him to his house. And he put the branch in his house and left it there as a bit of decoration. Now the next day, the woodsman and his daughter and his wife, they had to go out and do their work, and they were a bit late, so they'd left the house really messy. And they'd left for work. Now, when they came back, the house was clean and tidy. Everything had been put away, their beds had been made, and the sweeping had been done. Even the washing up from their very quick breakfast had been done. The woodsman wasn't sure why, and he checked to make sure nothing was missing from the house, but nothing was missing. It was just very tidy. He was very happy, but also a little suspicious. So, the next day, he and his wife went out to do their work, but he told the daughter to hide and look and see what was happening inside the house. And when she looked inside, she waited, and about an hour afterwards, the branch started to move, and out of the branch, a beautiful fairy appeared. A beautiful fairy. The girl rushed inside, and she took the branch and she threw it out so that the fairy wouldn't get trapped inside the branch anymore, and they became very good friends. Now, the daughter said, "My job is I tell stories. I tell stories in the palace for the prince." Now the fairy liked this idea very much, and she told the girl about her story, about how the prince was her friend and he'd saved her, and that she'd been tricked by a horrible witch and turned into a goldfish, and then she turned into a piece of tree, and now she's here in the house. The girl decided that she would take the fairy with her to the palace next time she went to work. And when she went to work and she took that fairy with her, she introduced the fairy to the prince by saying, "This is a very special storyteller, and she is going to tell you a story." The fairy sat in front of the prince and the daughter, who was pretending to be the fairy, and told the story of how she was saved from a big oak tree from a prince, and how a wicked witch had turned her into a goldfish in the bottom of a well and replaced her with a daughter. The daughter started to shake and tremble, and she realised that she'd been found out, and the more she shook, the more of her fairy disguise disappeared, and she turned into the witch's daughter. And she looked at the prince, and the prince looked at her, and he was very, very angry. "That is my fairy friend, not you. You've been tricking me." That is very, very bad. He decided that he was going to teach the daughter and the witch a lesson. He was going to teach the daughter and the witch a lesson. So he asked the fairy to come and sit with him, and then asked, "What should we do to teach them a lesson? How can they show that they are sorry for what they did to you?" And the fairy thought, "But what could it be?" Maybe you could type your answer below. How did the fairy get them to say sorry? What do you think? How should they say sorry? How should they show that they are sorry for what they did? Maybe you should type your answers below. I think if I was to show the fairy that I was sorry for tricking the prince, maybe I'd do something good for the fairy? I don't know. Or should I do something good for the prince, because it was the prince that they hurt as well? What do you think? Immy said give them flowers. Flowers, of course. They could cut all of the nicest flowers from the tree. All of the nicest flowers from the tree. And then they could give them as a gift to the fairy and the prince, and they could have them and make the house look really lovely. Giving them hugs, yeah. Could ask, "I'm really sorry, can I give you a hug?" And maybe they could have a nice hug. And Dahlia says, make them scrub the floor. Oh, maybe, yeah, they could scrub the floor nice and clean and shiny to show they're sorry. Well, they did just those things. They first said, "We're sorry," and offered a hug. And the prince said, "No, thank you, I don't want a hug." But the fairy said, "I would like a hug." So they hugged the fairy. And then they said, "We will clean the palace for you." And so that's what they did. They cleaned the palace floors, scrubbed them nice and shiny, so much so that they could see their faces in it. And then they cooked a delicious meal, Dahlia. They cooked a beautiful, delicious meal that they could all share. And last but not least, they went to the forest and they cut and picked the most beautiful flowers that you could imagine in lots of different colours, and reds and oranges and blues and yellows, and they made it into a nice bouquet and they put it in the house and made it look very, very pretty. And that was how they said sorry, and that was the story of the oak tree fairy, and they all lived very happy afterwards. I hope you liked my story. This time there wasn't really much of a moral to it. It was more just a fun fairy story, and it's all about that fairy in the oak tree. I think it was really nice that the witch and the daughter got to show that they were sorry. I think that was very kind. Yeah. And that was the story of the oak tree fairy. I hope you have a really, really good week, and I will be back next week again at 4 p.m. for another story. I don't actually know. I haven't really thought about what story to give you next week. So if you have an idea of what kind of story you'd like to hear, you can type it below. So if you've liked, oh, you're welcome, Imi, thank you for listening. If you've liked fairy stories more, then tell me that you like fairy stories more. If you like stories that have some kind of thing to make you think about stuff, then let me know. If you like mythology, then tell me that you like mythology, because I've got lots of things about Anansi and all different sorts of West African stories as well. Let me know. Anyway, I hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you for listening and continuing to support us at Creative Distance. It is really lovely. I really enjoy doing these with you, and it's great to see your answers. I'm so glad I got that fixed. I will see you again next week. I'm going to stop the video now. Bye!